Oh, so where we kind of left off, there were a few places that I wanted to explore that we didn't quite get to in uh, our last conversation last week. One of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit was you and I both share a love of comedy,
Oh, yes.
and you actually had a hand in being a stand-up. Because
Oh, yeah.
I remember asking in like the late '70s or early '80s, I think early '80s, like somebody, what's Mike Wolff up to? And they said, oh, he's doing stand-up comedy now, and hearing that about you, and then you detail it in your book.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, folks, just while we can do this, this is the book. It doesn't come with this piece of paper stuck in it. Is that better here? And
Hands on the title, but yeah, that's good.
yes,
On that note, yeah.
on that note, it's also going to be available as a talking book.
Yeah, right now it's out as paperback, hardback, and Kindle. And I finished the audio portion. I actually scored it, did a lot of music with it. And I'm just waiting to find out when they're going to put it out. I assume it'll be put out in a month or two. I don't know what they're waiting on. It got approved. There's just a lot of technical issues when you do an audio book. But I think it's okay. So I'm hoping that it's at least out for Christmas.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And it's a great book. You're a very good writer, and I think the way you put it to me, you did a half an hour a day.
Yeah. I
That's
did
how
a half an hour a day at my computer. The best course I ever took in high school was ninth grade. For a year I took typing. So I'm a pretty good typist, pretty fast. I was 90 words a minute. Now I'm way down, but So yeah, I would just sit at the computer and I wanted to write it myself. So I would write and what would happen was it would just come to me, So it was a great experience. And I'm mulling over writing another book. I haven't figured out the exact subject, but I'm mulling.
This book was relatively easy to write because the subject was you.
Well, if it was so easy, why did it take 9 years?
Easy, but
Yeah, but no. Yeah, I think anything I would write about would be thoughts and experiences I've had, though I have some ideas for some fiction, but that's such a commitment and I'm really busy doing music. So I don't know if I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I know. I think of things. I'm still working on my memoir too. But
important, and I'm really proud of it. I'm glad I did it, and I was getting, I got nominated for Best Biography for the Jazz Journalists Association for this year, and so I'm really. I didn't win, but I got nominated. So I'm really glad, that it's out there and people are liking it. It's great.
Well, it's a wonderful story, and we're going to get to actually. We didn't get to the most dramatic part yet. We're saving that for today because there's a real drama in there.
Oh yeah.
It's a frightening. It's a story of true life, and I'm saving it for a few minutes from now. We'll get to it. But I was thinking that like one of the things that we had, because you and I are exactly the same age, within a few months of each other. We were both born in 1952.
Right.
And one of the things that we had at that age was Johnny Carson.
Right.
On the like the idea of the first talk shows. We missed the very first talk shows, just for the kiddies that are listening to this, were
Well, I remember seeing Jack Parr when I was little, but it wasn't really important to me. And it wasn't until Johnny that it really kicked in.
Right, me too. I mean, I remember seeing Steve Allen, but not as a talk show.
Yeah.
Just I remembered he had good musical people on it, and later I found out who those people were, but I just was watching it with my parents and I said, oh, that's Chet Baker. And then, various people that he had. But with Carson, the biggest feature for me were the guest comics that he would have. I mean, it's the first time we saw people like Woody Allen as a stand-up and Bill Cosby with his early routines and, plus all those people. I mean, people like Jack Carson and John Biner and, all of those cats that were influential. I think on the jazz, a lot of jazz musicians had that type of humor.
Yeah.
It was a certain type of sense of humor, a hip sense of humor. Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul and Pete Barbuti.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Did you ever get to know Pete Barbuti at all? Or
never met him, but I really dug him on the show. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those kind of people. Because I had a similar experience when I used to study with Richie Kamuka, I would do my lessons at the Griffin Show, which I mentioned last time. And one of the side benefits of having the lesson with Richie and getting to meet the guys in the band like Jim Hall and, Saul Schlinger and other people, was staying for the show and hearing Moms Mobley live. Moms Mabley. Sorry, Moms Mobley.
Hank Mobley. Yeah.
Hank Mobley, Moms Mabley. Yes. And people like that. And what I meant to say was then, you're doing a stand-up. You call them your kind of lost period because in 1982, you stopped conducting for Nancy Wilson and went on to do something else, which you were not completely sure what that was, but you knew there was another destiny for you. Is that an easy way to put it? Yeah. So then you started hanging out with Louis Black, who I know from The Daily Show, and I find he's hilarious. If you don't know him, he's that angry guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And very funny. And there was a place called the West Bank Cafe. Mm-hmm. And Louis was an alumni of Yale, right? And
right.
There was certain kind of cats. You could maybe say it better than I can. I think that hung out there and started a comedy thing.
Oh yeah, actually my wife was at Yale Drama School when he was there. It was Yale Drama School. I mean, I didn't know my wife at that time, but Polly Draper. But yeah, there was a bunch of guys that hung out at Yale, and Louis was actually a playwright. He was in the playwrights group, and he was writing plays. And when he finished school, he came to New York, and he thought, well, what am I going to do? So they found this restaurant, the West Bank Cafe, and it has this downstairs room, and they convinced the owner, Steve Olson, who still owns it. It's on 42nd and 9th, and he's a great guy. We're all good friends now. And he let them run it as a kind of a theater bar, and they really were doing it to do one-act plays. So they did tons of one-act plays, tons of stars that weren't stars at the time came down there and did stuff, and some people that were famous too. And that's where I really got started doing stand-up, because I was accompanying a singer. I didn't tell you this last time. I don't know, but I was accompanying this great singer. Johnny
was.
Huh?
What was his name? Johnny or something?
No, I got it. I'm spaced on his name, but he was a classical African-American guy who was a classical singer, and he was such a good singer, but it was really difficult music. He was doing, even though he could also, he mostly did at that time, the late 20th century classical music, really, dissonant intervals. He could sing it all. Thomas Young, that was his name. Fantastic guy. And so Thomas, a friend of mine, Ray Leslie, he was a piano player, wasn't really a jazz guy, so he suggested me to Thomas, and we started rehearsing. And, just very sophisticated Sondheim and difficult tunes and Lush Life and, the key of A and just different stuff, So we rehearsed it. He goes, okay, yeah, that'll work out. He said, but I have to, it's an hour and a half show. I would love to take a break after 45 minutes and, just get off stage and chill out. And would you do a piano piece? And I go, sure. And then as it was getting closer, I thought, man, it's just piano and voice. They've been hearing me play away for 45 minutes. Maybe I could do this little fun thing I used to do at parties where I'd get at the piano and I'd play this commercial. There was a commercial at McDonald's called "You Deserve a Break Today, Come Up and Get Away" at McDonald's. And I'd start off and say, if the great composers, classical composers were alive today, first of all, they'd be really old. But second of all, to make money, they'd be writing jingles. So I would do that jingle as Bach, Mozart, Stravinsky, Ravel, Satie, and then I'd end with a really big, flourishing Beethoven. Da 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 ba 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 ba, and then take it to the minor key. It was really fun, and people anyway. This audience was a hip New York downstairs. It was audience, and they loved it. So at the end of that show, Lou came up to me and he said, you are really funny, man. We have a free show every Saturday at midnight. We call it the free show. And people just come that we like, and they do their bits, their comedy. They might do some kind of other crazy song or, a poem or whatever. We'd love to have you come there anytime you want. I went, really? He goes, yeah, you just come down and we'll put you on. So I thought, okay, but I got to get more material than this. This is all I know. But I did go down on the midnight, in the next week, because this was a time when I'd gotten off the road. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I didn't want to end up conducting, from Anne Margaret at Vegas or something. I knew that I was more of an artist than that, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So this comedy thing kind of happened like that. So I started doing comedy there, and I'd go back every week and I'd go, I got to spend the week. I got to write some stuff. In the meantime, to make money, I was teaching piano lessons. I was coaching singers, vocal coaching, that wanted to be on Broadway. And that was rough.
Yeah. When I went to Toronto, just not to interrupt, but after 9/11, I didn't want to come back to New York so quickly because I was still a little scared. So I stayed in Toronto. I was in Portland, Oregon. I was there for 6 months, and then I spent about a year and a half in Toronto. And of course, while I was in Toronto, with all the mover luck, my brother and I call it, which is a combination of bad circumstances and bad judgment, I ended up, the only employment I had was coaching these singers. And it could be rough at times, though I made some very nice friends and all that, and they were lovely people and everything. But then they had the SARS epidemic, and they had all of this stuff. So, I ended up coming back to New York because I felt if I was going to die broke, I might as well do it in New York. But
well, I put an ad in The Voice, and I put an ad as a piano teacher, and then I put an ad in a jazz piano teacher, and then an ad as a vocal coach, because I had learned that, studying singing, and I wasn't never done a musical or anything, but I just kind of learned a lot about that stuff, which really helped me because I accompanied singers. So I got interesting students. I got people that wanted to mostly be on Broadway. I got some R&B people. I had a really tough, interesting woman, who wanted to sing pop. I want to do, she was very operatic. I want to do the young thing, the hip thing. I go, well, okay, what do you want to do? She wanted to do the Sting song. Every breath you take, every move you make, every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. I go, no, it's I'll be watching you. I'll be watching you. Okay. So they say, I want to do the anger thing, the young thing, I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. And I would just sit there at the piano, just going, what time is it now? I look at my watch. Okay, it's going to be over soon. I'm going to make $40 or whatever I was making. So it was pretty painful to teach. I didn't really enjoy it too much.
Yeah,
but I also got a gig at a restaurant. A friend of mine was kind of part managing a restaurant on 42nd Street, not the West Bank. And I got a gig booking the entertainment. They had a piano upstairs. So I booked myself every Thursday night. It was mostly cabaret kind of stuff. But I could go down there and get a free lunch, which was really cool, So it's funny. I had been working as a professional musician really after high school, and then I went to college, and then went on the road. I got this gig with Cal Tjader, went on the road at 19, and actually when I was 20. So I'd been working for 11 or 12 years, and I hadn't really gotten to check out a lot of things. You know what I mean? I was very focused, and I was very,
insular world, jazz.
I ate, drank, slept, breathed music. But when I got with Nancy Wilson, it opened me up a little more to show business, because we worked with a lot of interesting people, and I was conducting and singing with her and arranging. But I just didn't want to do that anymore. I'd been traveling. I was tired of it. So I got off the road, and this is all the things I was doing. So I was also playing club date gigs, which are weddings or bar mitzvahs, and the people were terrible. But, anything to make money, man. So
when you talk about, but just what's funny, when you mentioned your McDonald's,
yeah,
it reminded me of a friend of mine who was a very hip guy who did stand-up comedy. He ended up doing a jazz radio show in Connecticut for a while. And but he did this bit that was like a parody of, do you remember when you'd hear da da dee da dee da 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 da, and this British guy would come on and say, how many of you recognize this theme as Stranger in Paradise?
Right.
How many of you actually know that it's, I think, the second or third Polovizian dance by Borodin? And then here, these records will be available to you. And they start to sell you these records by mail order and everything. So my friend did a parody of that, by saying, I'm sure many of you with the same voice realize, have heard this. You may recognize this as 4-in-1 by Thelonious Monk, but how many of you know that it's based on the chord changes of 5'2", Eyes of Blue, Coochie, 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 Coo. Has anybody seen my gal? And that was his bit, which he told me that he would get about 3 laughs.
Yeah, it was hip.
From the band. And then the audience would be sitting there staring at him like, what is this? But, so you.
Well, I think the jazz, general jazz cats do have a kind of absurd, cool, hip sense of humor. Like you said, that's what Lenny Bruce was doing, I guess, or whatever.
I think Lenny was sort of the father of that. And then Mort Saul was more the political side of it.
Yeah.
But, Lenny was the guy on the edge. And I was very good friends with Lenny's daughter, Kitty. We're still in touch years ago and everything. And cool. She brought me to a bunch of comedy clubs. I got to know comedians. And, some of those cats were pretty out, too.
Well, that what really was cool for me with Nancy Wilson, I always had heard my dad liked comedians. So I went and saw a bunch of them. He loved Alan King. I got to see Alan King, whoever. Sammy Davis Jr. was really funny when you see him do his thing. Guys were funny. But when I was with Nancy Wilson, we would always have a comedian, or often have a comedian opening, right? So we talked about that. David Letterman opened for us, different people. And that's how I became friends with Arsenio Hall. He was our opening act, So I was loving comedy then, and I was writing lines and asking Arsenio to say him. He'd say anything to try to, he didn't care. So when I got to this thing with Lewis Black, when I could, Lewis Black was not famous at that time. He was just basically a playwright, and he was starting to do comedy. That he had done it, I think, in Yale. They had a cabaret or something. So I just started doing it, and I had, because I was so loose and I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, and I was living by myself, but I had a very inexpensive apartment. I didn't really have expenses, in New York at that time. It was still super cheap. Yeah. So I just, I just was there, and I would still, if cats called me to play jazz gigs in town, I would do it for sure. But I just allowed myself to try stuff. So I took acting class. I did a play, I just did different things. But the comedy was what really excited me at that time. Now, I did use my piano a lot, sort of a jazz Victor Borge. That was how I was seeing it. But
you have a story. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just had a lot of I saw Victor Borge play, and I really loved him perform, and I saw him at Carnegie Hall. But I'd grown up watching him, and Dudley Moore was fantastic too.
Well, you have one story though in the book that I think is sort of like sums up how you, in the end, didn't how you decided not to have.
Well, what happened? Yeah, I had auditioned to be at the Improv, which was a real cool jazz club right across the street from the West Bank, and that was really one of the hip clubs. There were a few. There was a Comic Strip, Catch a Rising Star, and the Improv, but I was regular at the Improv. You usually were more of a regular at one at the other, but you could go to the others. They didn't play it. They paid like $15 or $10. So anyway, I was there one night, and I was doing well. I was starting to do some college dates, and I did some college dates, and I go do these wild things, and great comics were on the bill, like Adam Sandler and John Leguizamo. We were friendly, but I was up there with if I didn't have a piano, I'd bring a little Poly 800 keyboard, play some stuff. But one night at the Improv, I went on. I had an early slot, which is 9:15. After the MC would do 15, I did that. And right after me, they announced, ladies and gentlemen, a special treat, Robin Williams. And Robin jumps out, everybody's screaming. And so he did an hour. He was that was a Tuesday night. And on Saturday, he was going to host Saturday Night Live. So he was just trying to find material. He'd go, what do you guys want to talk about? And then he'd just go off for an hour. It was like genius,
Wow.
Really seeing a genius. I mean, just funny and soulful and, totally free. And I talked to him at the bar afterwards. I had done an opera bit, a funny opera bit, like a jazz thing, and he was very complimentary because he loved the opera. And then right after him, they go, ladies and gentlemen, Robert Klein, one of the great early comics. So he comes on, he does an amazing hour. He's working on new material. So afterwards, I'm hanging at the bar with these guys, and nice cats. But I go home and I really think about what I saw. And I thought, I'm a good comedian. I'm funny, but I'm not going to be like that. These guys were like Miles and Train or something like that. You know what I mean? And I said, maybe I have a chance as a jazz musician to really say something. But as a comedian, I'm talking about kind of jazzy, hip stuff. So for the general audience, I'm having to spend a lot of time telling them what I'm talking about. A lot of comedy is blowing up a balloon and busting it, right? So if you go out there and say, well, Michael Jackson wearing a white glove or whatever you're saying, at that time, or whatever you would say now, like, Trump, you just say Trump and everybody knows what you're talking about. Well, if I used to do a thing where a bit where I would say, there was this guy named Wild Bill Holiday and he started playing these tunes. I don't know why that I'm feeling so bad. And he was in a party and they had these helium balloons. He goes, I long to try something I've never heard. There's a Billie Holiday. Okay, but I'm having to explain all this stuff. And, it was just, and I'm 2 a.m. sometimes I'm going on. That's the slots I'm getting to these drunk prom kids, and I realized, man, I've got my work cut out for me. So I realized I was in this bubble of jazz and hipness and that I just
same thing happened to my friend who was doing that bit.
I just had a better chance of being a jazz musician, I thought, and that was more really something I could already kind of master. I mean, not that I ever master it, but that was something I already got so experienced. But I still did the comedy for like 5 years, even when I got Arsenio Hall. So it helped me get the Arsenio Hall show.
There's a funny thing too about what's esoteric and what's popular. Like I was thinking about fame and the fleetingness of it, and like what's a famous name now and how it might be in 50 years.
Yeah.
Like, if you talk about Taylor Swift, I mean, she's everywhere, ubiquitous. I mean, forget it. And I just wonder if, in the next early part of the next century, she's going to be like Lola Montez or something, like a name from a.
Yeah, I don't know. Everything is so temporary these days. I mean, I have to say, my sons are good friends with her, because they're musicians and actors. And my older son knows her well. And he just says, he likes her and says, she's the smartest woman I've ever met of anybody.
I would believe it.
So, and he likes her a lot. She's a good person. And she just gave every one of her crew $100,000 bonus. She's special. Now, I don't know whether her fame will last, but it doesn't need to last. She's doing it now. She's in her early 30s.
Right, well, I just used her as an arbitrary example, but I'll tell you.
But I know what you're saying.
But you know what's funny is one time when I'm sitting there, this is about 20 years ago, and we're taking out, a friend of mine takes out a jar of Paul Newman's salad dressing. And I said, oh, yes, that incredible master chef, Paul Newman. I said it sort of facetiously. And he looks at me, he was about a 20-year-old at the time. He says, you mean he wasn't? I said, well, no. She said, well, what did he do? I said, well, he was it. And I start running down Paul Newman movies, The Hustler, HUD, Butch Cassidy, The Sundance Kid, The Sting. And he's like, no. Finally, The Hudsucker Proxy. He said, oh, is he in that? And that was like his obscure Coen Brothers movie.
That's the way it goes, right? Yeah. It's, we're not all going to be Miles Davis and Bach. You just got to do what you want to do. And, probably everybody will mostly just fade out. That's cool. I think it's cool, man. I'm cool with it. But yeah, who knows what's going to happen with all these people?
I think there's no alternative to it anyway. But, you are who you are. And
but back to me. But yeah, I know.
I mean, but, I'm a huge Davy Shilkraut fan. For me, the world wouldn't be the same without Dave Shilkraut's alto playing. Maybe there's only 10 of us, but he's not here anymore, but we still remember him, So there's something to be said for that. Another thing you mentioned in the book that I wanted to get around to, just funny, You mentioned partly it had to do perhaps with your Tourette's, but I think the way you put it is really funny and brilliant, that you like to chew on words.
Yeah. Well, taste them.
Taste them. Yes, you kind of taste the
Yeah,
words.
it's definitely a tick that I have where we have lots of ticks, but if I there's a word I like there used to be an ad for this thing called Juicy Juice on TV. And my wife would tell me, I wouldn't even know what I'm doing. She goes, man, that Juicy Juice ad came on, and for 2 hours you're just going juicy juice, juicy juice. I just had to taste it. And the whole thing with a tick, like I tighten up here, I make this noise. It's an impulse, and you feel this impulse coming, and it's called a premonitory thing, premonition, and you have to do it. It's like you have to scratch, you have to itch, you have to have an orgasm, whatever it is you have to do. These ticks are the same thing. So they vary though. They wax and they wane. Sometimes I don't really have a lot. All the time I had cancer, I had no ticks. There was no room in my body for that. But all my life I've had it. And so, yeah, that's how it goes,
I was thinking that I myself also, I don't think I have Tourette's, but I have had this habit. I said, that's funny. You do the same thing I do. I would find a word. Even I remember being a little kid and hearing my grandmother say Luxenkugel.
Oh.
And I would stay on Luxenkugel for a half an hour until they had to get me to stop.
Yeah, it feels so good to say it, right?
And I'd say it with an accent, Luxenkugel. And I would start exaggerating it and saying it. Other words, Jimmy Witherspoon.
Oh.
I love to say that.
That's a good one.
Isn't that a good one? Jimmy Witherspoon.
Witherspoon. Oh, yeah.
Cucamonga.
Oh. Well, I have another thing. I think we talked about it before. The thing that people mostly know Tourette's from is people that swear bad words, right?
Right.
Whatever the worst word is, they'll say it. They'll use the N word when they don't mean to be prejudiced, whatever. They just, these words, it's like pink elephants, they say, you can't. So I have a thing, I don't say them, but in my mind, remember I told you I'm a good typist? I type them. So I'll type Fuckyou, and then I'll change the keyboard and I'll go Fuckyou. So I'll put all those letters from the left side to the right side in my mind. And I do it a lot of times. I don't know how conscious I am of it. So if I hear a word, not only am I tasting it, but I'm typing it.
That's interesting. That's what I do with music on sometimes. Like I've written this kind of book of musical equations.
I know. You gave it to me. I was like, man, that would take me about 30 years to learn. Yeah.
Well, I've done since I was a little kid. I've been doing these musical equations in my mind. And it reminded me of, and Jesse and I've talked about that when I saw that movie, The Queen's Gambit.
Oh, yeah.
Creates the
chessboard. She was
singing
on the ceiling.
On her ceiling. And I have a keyboard and a saxophone keyboard, like kind of in my mind. And what you're talking about is rearranging these letters. And the words like that is a similar mechanism. So I wonder if there's not a little bit of Tourette's in a lot of creative artists that we don't know. I know
Tourette's is about it's a brain situation, and it's about extra dopamine. So when you have Tourette's, you don't do anything that a normal person can't do. You're not doing back flips or something. You're doing all the regular movements, right? So you just don't really. My observation is you don't have control of me. You have to make these movements. So it's possible to have people that have little bits of those different tics, or there's a lot of people that have tics. If you go to a second grade class, 50% of the children have tics, but their brain grows out of it. And then a lot of people with real bad Tourette's, in their puberty, it gets better. Mine did not get better, but many people do. It's a brain thing for sure. It's chemical. But it is called psychoneurological, because there's, if you're excited or something, or scared or happy, it does affect it. It's not like it's just coming out on its own. Your thoughts are part of it. And for me, we were talking about music, I would get tics on sounds and fingerings, where I'd have to do it over and over, or, play a certain chord, or and I don't have to move my fingers. I just feel my fingers in my mind playing. I'm sure you do that too with your horn. I can feel myself playing like just now a C major 7. I play C, G, D in the bottom hand. Then I'll play maybe, E triad or F sharp. I can just see that and hear that because of doing it so much. I don't have perfect pitch, but if I'm going to play a tune I know, Stella, I'm going to hear it, I'm going to feel it, and I'm probably going to be on the right notes.
Right. I mean, and
it's
I think
tactile.
some of that might come from being on the road too, because when you're in these planes and trains and automobiles, you can't just grab your horn, or you can't take a keyboard with you. Now you probably, there are portable things you can do, but I mean, we had to do that practicing in our heads to just envision the way the thing goes.
Well, I don't think for me it was that. Maybe it was when I was younger and I really had to practice, but I just know that 24/7 music is going in my head. Not necessarily music I'm working on or I want to work on, but I have a student now that wants to learn this George Shearing tune that he wrote, but there's no chart for it. And it's a little unusual because, it's just, so she's got some chart and it's not right. So I'm just having to work on it. Of course, now it's going on in my fucking head, and it's, I'm hearing it. Okay, now I got the bass line, I got the melody. I'm feeling these notes inside. I'm gonna have to write the whole thing out for her, and I'm not like a guy that can just hear it and know it exactly. I gotta sit at the piano, and so that's going on in my head, now because I heard it a lot.
Yeah, and I think Oliver Sacks talks about, well, how does he call it? Something worms.
Earwigs.
Earworms, actually.
Earworms, yeah.
Yeah, and that idea that, like when you can't, since we're talking about fixations, it could be you deserve a break today. Like I have to turn off the TV whenever that and have it your way and I like want to throw a rock at the TV every time I hear it because that will stick in my head now when I'm trying to get to more important music.
I used to say that ringing around the collar. Remember that ad, ring around the collar?
Sure.
I want to put my fist through that TV, man.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So
I was a good friend of Oliver Sacks, by the way, if you want to talk about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, through the, I was a chairman of the board of the Tourette Syndrome Association for quite a while. I was involved with that. My wife wrote and starred in a movie called The Tick Code with Gregory Hines. I think we talked about that.
Right. As a matter of fact.
So the Tourette Syndrome Association found out about it. They came on the set, the president and somebody else, to make sure we were doing the right. Tick Code. There you go. To make sure we were doing the right thing, and they're good for them. They were kind of monitoring, but they didn't know they had a guy, me, on top of it, producing, doing the score and working with the actors. So they were cool. And they said to me, well, why didn't you do anything with us before? I said, well, I was ashamed of it. I was on Arsenio and everything, but I tried super hard when the camera was on me not to have tics. And I could stop it for a little bit. And then it would go off me and I'd let it fly, So anyway, I got involved with them. And Oliver Sacks was quite involved. He had written that book about that guy with Tourette's, Woody Ticky Ray. And the book is called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Oh, okay. That's what that
There's
book
a chapter. There are different chapters of his patients. And one was, it's not his real name, but he called him Woody Ticky Ray. And it was about a drummer. And this drummer had intense Tourette's, and he had a regular job, 5 days a week, and he played gigs on the weekends. So there was some medicine they had for him, and the guy would take it during the week, but he wouldn't take it in the weekend because he liked to be free to play the drums. He could just, it would just happen. So, but reading, when I found out about it, I read this chapter and went, God, I have Tourette's syndrome. That's how I found out I had it.
That is. I didn't know
so I met Oliver because when we did the Tick Code, he came to a screening of it, and he was very positive, and that helped us a lot to have him, into it. And I met him, and then once I got involved with the Tourette Syndrome Association, we went to a lot of conferences, and he drove me, just the two of us. He drove us up to a conference once. We spent the whole weekend together. He was kind of a on the spectrum kind of guy, super smart, super sweet. Really loved him. He loved my children. He was just a great guy. But totally like what we're talking about, he could feel people. It was really special and super intellectual. So
what a beautiful thing to know that guy like that. Yeah.
So anyway, when he wrote a book and he did a lot of stuff on Tourette's, and so he had me over for dinner, and he had a piano. He was a pianist, classical pianist, and he wanted to interview me. And I don't think my Tourette's was as crazy enough for him as he wanted for his book. I mean, he had some real intense cases, but we spent a lot of time together. He'd ask me questions. How do you feel when this happens? He was kind of interviewing me and checking me out. And really, I have a lot of warm feelings for him. I miss him.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into your marriage, your relationship with Polly, and that thing, but maybe a little bit in reverse. Like first, how did the tick code? I mean, did she just wake up one morning and because she produced it, and was it?
She wrote it
and wrote it. That's what I mean. She wrote it and produced it. Did she just say, I've got an idea, or how did it start?
I don't really know. When she was a star of a show called 30 something.
Right.
And, well, first of all, when she was at that Yale drama school, the one we're talking about with Lewis Black, right? She went in as an actress. She'd gone to Yale undergraduate, but she was an English major and a drama major. And then she was acting even then. But then when she got into Yale Drama School, they had a playwriting course, and they would have the actors there to act out what the playwriting students wrote. So she would be in the class, and she should have learned a lot about writing from that. And so she started writing. And then, but she was married before me to a really, really successful film and TV writer. And so she worked with him on some stuff. So she was checking it out. Then she got on 30 something, and they were really Ed Swick and Marshall Herskovitz were they started it, the showrunners and the producers and directors and writers. They were very open to the actors telling their stories and having things to say. So she got involved with that and started writing little bits. And then after 30 something, she'd get a part and she didn't like it. And if they let her, she'd write it. And then she just got into writing, kind of fell into it. So at a certain point, I think we had our oldest son, I can't remember, but she just said, at this point, I knew I had Tourette's, and she'd been around the scene, and she just got this idea to write the script. It wasn't her first script, but she got an idea to write this script about a 12-year-old jazz pianist with Tourette's syndrome. So she wrote it, and it was really good.
Really good.
Yeah, I mean, it went through a lot of changes, with a first draft, and you have readings of it, and you keep working on it. And she shot a short of it. She took a directing class. She wanted to direct. She'd got a lot of experience on movie sets and TV sets. Watching the directors and the camera people and everything. So she ended up not directing this. She wrote it and starred in. This guy Gary Winnick directed it. And
I think it's important that people know that this was not a biography, so to speak, of you and your childhood. Your childhood was not at all. I mean,
no, she just took the idea of me having Tourette's, being a jazz pianist, and what I went through, because she could, she knew, and she took that and put it into a kid in New York who was with a single mom, which I wasn't, and it was really very creative.
It was very creative, and it was.
But she was really cool about having musicians in it, and I made sure that. And you wanted to have mostly real musicians in it, like Dick Burke and John B. Williams and, people like that. And Gregory wanted it to be real jazz musicians, and they were funny, man. So Dick Burke was a really close friend of mine, and he was funny. So I told her stories that Dick Burke had told me, and she put some of them in for him to talk about with the guys when they're hanging out in the diner. And, I used to hang with those guys all the time. So a lot of it, her stuff usually comes when she writes. I mean, sometimes she'll write for a studio now, and then they have an idea. So she's got to write that idea. But usually she just brings something from her life. Like she created that TV show, The Naked Brothers Band, and we can get into that. But it all comes from her life, and then she makes it fiction,
Right. Now, when you met, you were doing, well, get a little bit ahead in our story. After those lost years in New York, you got a call from Arsenio.
Well, the lost years of New York were really important to me when I look back on it. The comedy, I did acting, and I became really good friends with Robert Duvall. And that was great for me because I'd hang with Bobby, and he lived right on 86th Street, but really close to me. I was on West End 92nd. He was on 86th between Broadway and Riverside. So we spent a lot of time together because I knew his wife, good friend of his wife's, and his wife was younger, more my age, and we became friends.
So you knew him before you knew Polly.
No, before I knew Polly, yeah.
That's what I mean.
I was. These were those years we were talking about in the 80s.
Right.
It's in my 30s, so early 30s. So I would, he would say, "Why don't you come up with me? I'm going to be shooting." He shot this movie with Robert Redford, called The Natural. About he was, based
Baseball player, yeah.
Right. So he said, "I'm going to be shooting it up in Niagara, by Niagara Falls in Canada, and blah blah blah. Oh, I'm going to give you a plane ticket. I want you to come hang with me for a week. We have a camp." He said, "Call it Camp Duval. And we're going to, on the weekends when I'm not working, we're going to go to the beach. We're going to go do all this stuff, Barbara Hershey and all these people." I go, "That sounds cool, man." So I went up there and, we hung every day. He wanted me to come on the set. He brought me to the set, stand right behind the camera, So I learned a lot. I just learned about show business. He had a lot of parties with a lot of famous people. And so I got a taste of this whole world, I got a taste of it. And I was really excited by it. And I remember one party I was at, I was playing piano and Willie Nelson was singing with me and Pat Metheny was playing guitar, just things like that were happening all the time. So he had just got an Academy Award for Tender Mercies, so he was doing country western. So June Carter Cash was singing with me and, it was awesome. So then those were those 5 years of scuffling, playing terrible gigs,
Remember you tell a story in the book that it was actually Duval's New Year's Eve party.
Yeah.
And you had to go because you had contracted this ridiculous gig for a kind of, let's say, a connected family of some kind, perhaps. And it was actually just, one of those nightmare club dates.
It was a nightmare
party to go and do this.
It was a nightmare, man. I had to leave this most amazing Harry Dean Stanton. I'm talking with Harry Dean and, Glenn Close is there and all these people. And then I have to go do my fucking, 11 p.m. New Year's Eve gig in Queens. I had to take a key, just solo. And I'm getting $500. Those guys probably got $2,000. But I thought, wow, New Year's Eve, I need bread, So I'm going and I wear this suit and I'm sweating already. And I have to bring my Poly 800, which is not a very good keyboard, and a drumulator drum machine and a microphone and a little amp because I'm going to sing. And I don't know any pop tunes. So I bring like a fake book of Stevie Wonder tunes. And I go there and it's three couples, kind of connected looking couples in leisure suits, good guys. And they set up me in the living room on the floor, and they set up 3 TV tables. They face me, and they're eating, and I'm sitting there going, "Everybody's got a play, da, 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 da. Isn't she lovely?" The drum machine's going, sweating. I can't sing. Oh my God, man! So I take a break. I do it again, and finally I get out of there. They said, "Hey kid, you want some scungili?" I go, "Yeah, sure, man." I just thought to myself, I had to take a cab. They had checker cabs. So I could get all my equipment in there. And I'm coming back at 2 a.m. It's freezing cold. It was New Year's Eve. I missed this party. And I said, if I ever make it, I'm never playing New Year's Eve again. And that was the last New Year's Eve gig I ever did.
That was fortunate. So now I'm just thinking that you get a call from you and Arsenio are still talking since the Nancy Wilson thing. You've remained friends.
Yeah, we remained friends. And whenever I was in LA, we'd hang out. He had a little group of guys that played basketball together, and, some famous actors and this and that. And I played ball with him. We'd hang out and talk on the phone. And, I saw he did Coming to America. I'd call him, "Hey man, that was cool. Yeah, blah, blah." And then he subbed for Joan Rivers on the Late Show. Yeah, he was great on that. We were talking about that. And I said, "Arsenio, you killing it, man." "Yeah, Mike, So he called me one day. He said, "Oh, I'm going to do a talk." He had told me when I was with Nancy Wilson, he was our opening act. He said, "One day I'm going to have a talk show and you're going to do the theme." And I went, "Okay, whatever." I believe he was a positive individual. When he got this, he called me. He said, "Hey man, I'm going to do a talk show, but I want to do an all-woman band." I said, "That's a great idea." I had no thoughts that I would do. I was in New York. He was in, Hollywood. So I said, he said, will you help me find some people? So I start putting out some feelers in LA. I didn't really know anybody, truthfully, any women jazz musicians out there. So I'm trying to find some other people. And after a week or two, he calls me back. He says, I've changed my mind. I go, well, what do you want? He goes, I want you to be the band leader. I go, what? I go, man, I don't think I want to come to LA. He goes, well, why do you want to stay at LA, man? You want to be you want to be a male model or a theater actor? I go, no. He says, well, then come to LA, man. This is happening. So
are you staying in New York? Right.
Oh, yeah, I was in New York. I flew out on my own dime. I had no bread then. But again, flights were cheap. You all right?
Yeah, I'm gonna maybe have to take a little bit of break in a minute. But I want you to tell this story, and then maybe you could tell your Count Basie story, and that will give me just enough time to do this little medical thing I've got to do. I'll go off screen, but I want to hear the rest of this.
All right, I'll just start talking about whatever comes to my mind.
Well, I'll finish the story. I can finish this one.
Oh, okay. So anyway, I'll tell it to Jesse. So I went to Cannonball. So Arsenio calls me, and I fly out there, and I get a rent-a-wreck, which is $5 a day, and I stay with the road manager for Nancy Wilson, Sparky, who I always stayed with, and I have an appointment to go to Paramount. So I drive to Paramount Studios, Melrose Avenue, 5555 Melrose Avenue, the big arches you see in all the movies, and I drive through, and I'm behind a big Mercedes and a Rolls Royce, and then me. I'm in this rent-a-wreck that's like, doing like that. And so they go in, the guy looks at me. What do you want? I got, Michael Wolff for Arsenio. And Arsenio was new, the show wasn't on. But anyway, he sends me, okay, you got to go up to the Bob Hope thing. You got to park here. So I park, and I'm walking, trying to find it. There's a million streets with studios on it and offices. So I finally find it, and I go in, and he gives me a hug and says, yeah, come on in, man. And so I had sent out a tape of some of my comedy, and I meet with him and his producer. And his producer is a little young woman who was younger than he and I were. I don't know how old she was, 35. Or she was just little, really sweet, from Chicago. So her name is Marla Kell Brown. I love her. And so we're talking, and, we don't talk long. And then this guy, Milt Hoffman, who was kind of the business guy, comes in, and we talk for a while. And then that's it. So, okay, thanks. I stand up, and Arsenio gives me a hug. He goes, hey, man, I want you to get this job. That's it. I walk out. The next day, I'm in LA. They call me. You got the job. So I go back to New York. I get everything organized. I fly back out to LA. I don't have a place to live. My friend lets me sublet his apartment in West Hollywood. And I have to figure out how to be a band leader of a talk show, which is totally different than anything I'd ever done. But the good thing was that I had already done a lot of conducting for Nancy Wilson, so I kind of knew what was happening. Anyway, we spent weeks, just try to audition musicians, and we ended up with a great band with Terry Lynn Carrington on drums and Star Parodi on keyboards, Peter Manu on guitar, and Johnny Williams on bass. It was great. And we did a couple of warm-up shows at the end of 1989. And we came back after Christmas and started this show. And in 5.5 years, I did it. It was a great experience. The interesting thing is I didn't have any money, so I had to borrow money from my mom to get a lawyer to negotiate my deal. But it was, it paid off. It paid off. It was great. So that was a great 5.5 years. And thanks for that. That was a good question, Bob. And so I'm going to...
you mentioned, you didn't have the money, you had to borrow it. I remember, 20, 30 years ago, it was just, even if you didn't have money, you could make it happen if you had the right connection.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I luckily my mom, it was $10,000. My mom was a social worker. It was a big nut for her, but I promised I'd said, I'm going to be making money. I was making like $5,000 a week or something like that. I never made any money. I said, I promise I'll pay you right back if it works out, and it did. And so I got that and got a really good deal. I mean, it wasn't getting rich like Paul Schaefer, but, it was a good gig, and it was through the Musicians Union. So I got a pension, which I'm getting now, which is cool. And social, security. I never really had those kind of gigs before. And I had an amazing experience. I got to play with the greatest of rock and roll stars. I became really good friends with Warren Zevon, who was a singer-songwriter. I loved Warren. I became very, very close. Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey's first TV gig. I played with her, played with so many people. And then all the jazz people. Oh, I got to play with B.B. King, who I loved. I got to play with Sammy Davis Jr. I got to play with, so many great artists, man. Yeah, jazz guys. I mean, Wayne Shorter, Chick Corea, Ayrto, Herbie Hancock, Branford Marcellus. I can't remember all the people.
You had the experience of, you got a great story of, you didn't actually play with Miles because he came with his band.
Right.
But you almost gave him your jacket.
Yeah, well, I love Miles so much that he came on the show, and he had lived near me, and I kind of followed him around one day, but I didn't have the guts to talk to him. I was kind of afraid of him. But he came on the show. He's very sweet. This was not too long before he died, a few years. And so we and I talked, and he said, "Yeah, come down tomorrow and check me out at the club." He was playing the Coach House way down in Southern California. So after the show was over, we usually shot about 5:15 to 6:15 or 6:30, something like that. I got in the car and I drove way down there, and I didn't tell them I was coming, but they recognized me because I was famous then, so they let me right in. And I go up, I hear the first set. After the first set, I go up, and he invites me in to the dressing room, and he and I are sitting there with some woman he's seen. And we're talking. We had a great talk. He goes, "Oh, I like Arsenio." I said, "Oh, look, man, next time you come back, do you think you could play in our band, not just bring your band?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, sounds good." He probably didn't mean it. But I was wearing a really cool gray coat I had gotten. I got a lot of clothes for the show. I had to wear a different outfit every day. I mean, I could repeat it, but not too often. So really cool. Not great, but it was a gray kind of tuxedo looking coat that had like black stripes, and he kept going, "I like that coat," and he's touching that coat. And I was thinking, he wants that coat. I'm thinking, forget about it, Miles. You're way too, he's a tiny little dude. You're not going to fit in this coat. So that's the last time I saw him, until he was in the hospital. I actually went and saw him, but I kind of wished I'd given it to him. But then I thought, oh, he would have never worn it. And now I still have it, and I call it the Miles coat. But he was my hero, Miles and Cannonball. So I was so happy we became acquaintances, It's great.
So as you were doing this show, I mean, you had a lot of illustrious guests, but there was one special guest.
Well, before I talk about the special guests, I just want to say, talk about comedians. I mean, Milton Berle, Jerry Lewis, all those guys. And I dealt with them all because, Mishpuka, they knew we could talk. And, Milton Berle needed some help with a microphone. Or I don't know. I just got involved with those guys. I wanted to
help getting his pants off from what I hear.
But who I became really good friends with, who I'm still friends with, is George Lopez. He was the go-to comic, was not famous at the time, but he became famous during that 5.5 years. And he and I were good friends, and his wife and my wife, and, he had a daughter and my kids, we became family friends, and we're still family friends. And there was a lot of guys, Emo Phillips, so many comics, man, I can't even remember them all, but almost a couple a week, So that was a great experience. And I loved all the actors, and I loved the actresses, and I got to meet all these great actresses. And when I told you I was at the Improv, but when I performed at the Improv in the 80s, I always performed on Tuesday nights, 9:15 to 9:30. So I'd go to the bar, and because we weren't paid anything, we were allowed to get free beers, free drinks, So I wasn't a big drinker, but I'll tell them, you have a beer. And I'd sit at the bar, and they had a TV, and they always turned it to ABC. And it was moonlighting till 10. And then at 10:30 something came on. And I always watched it there. And I thought, I really like this long-legged brunette with a hoarse voice, And I thought, oh, Polly Draper, that's her name. One day I'll meet her. So one day I'm on the show, a couple years in, and I see they have a board in the producers where they're booking everything. And they have these note cards with every name, the name of all the guests. It's like a puzzle, Chinese puzzle. Monday. Okay, this guest, music guest, blah, blah, blah. Tuesday. And sometimes they go, oh, this person canceled. We have to do that,
Like special in a restaurant.
Yeah. So I see one day, Polly Draper's coming in. I go, oh, man, I hope I can meet Polly Draper. But, sometimes I can't meet them. There's somebody I really want to meet. If I can, I'll just go into their dressing room. I was, musical director. I could talk to anybody. I got to meet Robin Williams again that way, and James Garner. I was a huge fan of his. I knocked on doors, Sammy Davis, all these people, Milton, Jerry Lewis. But with her, she wasn't there early. I think she was working, so she came late, just in time for hair and makeup. But I happened to be in the hair and makeup thing, and she sat right next to me. So we really hit it off, and I was cracking her up, and I thought, this is my shot. But I didn't ask her out or anything. So I was too shy. I don't know. I just didn't feel it, So she was really great on the show. She left. And a week or so after, I thought, I gotta get a hold of her. So I asked the producer, how can I get a hold of her? So why don't you call up? I don't know if there was email then. I don't know. Maybe there was email, but why don't you, contact her agent? So I call the agent, I leave a message. I don't hear anything. And I just, after a week or two, I go, forget it, man. So I look at the sheet that booked her, and I see her address where the limo picked her up. And it was 6 blocks from my address. So I went to this store called Arturo's Flowers, and I got 101 roses for $19.99. And I got a card, and I said, I'm Michael Wolff, blah, blah, blah. Here's my phone number. And I put it on her doorstep, and I left. And I didn't hear from her for like 3 or 4 days. I go, what? So I go after with work, because, the show would end. It was, kind of fall. So it was still light, at 7 o'clock. And I drive by, and I see my flowers wilted with the card. So you know what? I went and got another 101 roses, $19.99. I got rid of those. I put them down. I didn't hear a word. So then I waited a week. Same thing happened. So the third time I leave them, and I get a call, and it's Polly Draper. And she goes, hey, I'm calling to thank you for the flowers. I got a message you would call from my agent, but I thought you were the guy I'd met at the dog park. I didn't know you were Michael Wolff from the show, blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah. I was trying to get a hold of you. And so I said, I got a gig. Would you like to come? I'm going to be playing it for a party for PETA in a private thing. It was great. It was with my band from the show.
PETA is the Save the Whales.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not Save the Whales, but it was so you don't have fur coats, stuff like that.
Right, exactly.
So she came to that. It was cool. She was so famous then, and I was really great. I got Polly Draper coming with me. And then I asked her out on a real date. So that was maybe, that was during the week. And then I think the next weekend, we had a real date. So I go to pick her up at her house. Anyway, it was fantastic. We go out to date. We went, what did we do? We went out to dinner. We went to a jazz club. We went late night to Cantor's Deli, And then I just took her home, and I just thought, this is going to be good. This is going to be a good relationship. In the meantime, she was separated from her husband, living with another dude. But that dude went away. I just kept after her, man. I just kept after her. I'd go and wait in her yard. She had a little swing. I'd wait in the swing, I stalked her, basically,
That's what they would call it now.
Now, I called it ardent pursuit. Now it would be called stalking, for sure. Be careful what you wish for. Now we've been married 31 years. We've been together 35 years, got 2 grown kids, But yeah, I was lucky.
Well, you were. I think she's, it's wonderful. And in fact that, especially in art or entertainment, to have a marriage that endures like that is it's a rare thing anywhere in the world, but it's, especially in our profession.
Oh, yeah. And we both traveled a lot for work, and we made an agreement at the very beginning of our relationship, even before we got married, that we would never ask the other person not to go do something. Like, if I'm going to Japan, I'm touring, and she's going to do a movie in, Canada or whatever, or wherever, which say, we're not going to do it. We're just going to, you got to go work 6 months and, off and on, stay in Canada, go do it. I tell her, go do it. Great.
Well, this inadvertently sort of led you to come back to New York, didn't it, in a way?
Definitely, in a way. We stayed in LA we got married, and then Arsenio ended, 30-something ended. We had our first child. We bought a house together and got married. And so
in California.
Yeah, in LA. It's perfect timing, really.
1988, 89, something like.
Well, no, this was in the 90s, because my show ended in May of 94.
Well, that's right. He started in
94. 94.
Right, 94 he entered.
Her show had ended a few years before. So we were both had made enough money that we're okay. I mean, we were still working. I was actually concentrating on writing film scores. So I was doing more TV and film at that point. And she was just a busy actress. You know, she was doing she wanted to do film. So that's mostly what she did. And then that's when she was writing, you know. So I'd done the Sundance Composers Workshop, where you go up to Sundance in Park City, and 3 or 4 times. That was great. I got to meet Robert Redford and Thomas Newman, and, you know, they have all these filmmakers up there. So one of the filmmakers was assigned to me, and I wrote the music for that film. It wasn't that good, but, you know, I was learning. And I was getting some gigs. You know, I wrote TV films and did a hip hop movie called Who's the Man? It's actually a really good movie. So